Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Woo-wee, Mike, we are coming in off of a very hot weekend.
Yeah, I would say I still have the scorch marks on my butt from what an exciting weekend it was.
Yes, it was exciting, and it was literally and figuratively hot.
Yes. So if you guys out there haven't been to Summerfest in Milwaukee, it is this like 2-week festival.
Magnificent.
Where on the big stage, it'll be somebody like Tom Petty,
Pink,
or the Rolling Stones or something on the big stage.
Yeah.
And then they have 12 side stages where it'll be another headliner. So like on Thursday, we played on the stage with AWOL Nation was the headliner.
Yes.
And so we played and it was 90 degrees.
And the tickets are what, like $15, $12?
It's like $15 and you get in, you can see any of the headliners.
Yeah, so you just wander around from stage to stage, and there's all these excellent bands playing, and our band Sunspot played, so we had a nice scorching hot afternoon slot.
Yeah, so we had another chance to introduce the people of Milwaukee to our weird sounds.
Yeah, and it was fun, right on the Lake Michigan there, which is basically an ocean.
Right. It's an inland sea.
Yeah, so we had the nice lake breeze coming off every so often.
It was funny. I was thinking about, so we played a song called Chariots of the Gods. And I mentioned, I think, Giorgio, like to the audience or whatever. I said, like, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. Right? And I get like 2 people out there going, ha, ha. And everybody else going,
crickets chirping.
Right. They don't know who Eric Von Daniken is. They hadn't read Chariots of the Gods. They're like looking at me like I'm like, aliens, baby.
They're like, we need more explanation, please.
Right. So, but we had an awesome time at Summerfest.
So much fun, and saw tons of friends, and there were people there that we've met like
all over the country.
Yeah, that came from afar, and we got to see Sunspot shirts and people singing along in the crowd. It was great. So thanks everybody who came to our set for that.
Yes, if you were listening to this and you came to Summerfest, I have so much love for you.
Yes, and a special shout out to Josh, another musician friend of ours who stopped by and said that he's a listener of the podcast too.
Yes, thank you, Josh. Appreciate that.
Excellent guitarist, keyboardist, singer, all around awesome dude.
Yeah, so basically this week we've been working on music, we've been playing shows, and we had an awesome conversation for the episode this week.
Yes, we sure did. Oh, one of my favorites.
Yeah, and so the first time I saw this particular guy, I'd seen him on Ghost Adventures before. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's cool on Ghost Adventures. But I hadn't like watched his solo show. And so he did a thing at the Chicago Paranormal Conference. And I think I even talk about this in the Chicago Paranormal Conference episode, Haunted Shore. Another Lake Michigan kind of thing.
Yes.
And I talk about just how he blew everybody away. Like so professional, so interesting. It's a real presentation.
Yeah.
It's not just some dude talking about ghosts for 2 hours.
Well, and that's how the interview felt as well. I didn't want it to end. He had so many interesting things to say.
He did. And so, guys, this is, I believe, the greatest haunted historian of New England ever to walk the earth.
All right. Well, let's not hold off anymore. We got to get to this interview.
Everybody, let's give you a little Jeff Belanger.
Jeff Belanger is the researcher, writer, and adventurer who finds all those spooky locations for the crew of the Ghost Adventures TV show to investigate. He's also written numerous books on ghosts and hauntings and recently climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. His PBS TV series, New England Legends, recently became available on Amazon Prime. And Wendy, Allison, and I are so happy to welcome Jeff Belanger to the show. Thank you for joining us, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We first met you in person at the Chicago Hauntings, at least I did last year. And
right.
Actually, that was 2 years ago.
Okay.
I think it might have been 3 years ago because I haven't been there the last 2, but I will be back again this year.
Hey,
Fantastic.
all right.
Oh, because last year you were at Sage Paranormal, weren't you? Over the pond?
I was in England, last year. So I will be back in Chicago this year. So that'll be great.
Well, then we'll be there to bug you again.
Awesome.
But I didn't know too much about you before I saw your presentation, and I was like, this guy's got something going on that we need to learn more about. So it's been a couple of years since we've met, and in that time, we wanted to have you on the podcast the entire time. So thank you for coming down.
Well, thanks for finally asking.
Well,
so polite.
Okay, so Jeff, let's start with people that maybe aren't familiar with your work and stuff. Where are you from, and why are you a weirdo?
How long do we have?
All the time. You need to tell us why you're weird.
The from part is pretty easy. I'm from New England, and that's where I live. I hail from the northeastern United States. I like to think of us as kind of like the attic of the country, the spooky attic where we keep secrets and dark stuff. But I'm a paranormal author and researcher. I've been interested in this stuff pretty much my whole life. And I think when you grow up in New England and places with a lot of history, you can't help but also get hooked on the haunts because they go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And I'm fortunate that I live in a part of the country that just kind of talks about it. It's not so weird. It's just like, oh yeah, that old house, it's haunted. So what? I mean, it doesn't have to be a big thing other than that. So from childhood, I've been interested. I did a lot of growing up in Connecticut, and I lived in the town next to Ed and Lorraine Warren. So I knew them since I was 10 years old, and I'm sure that had some influence as well. Yeah, so I was, I've been in their house since in their museum and hearing those stories, and I remember thinking, wow, this is crazy. I went to school to be a writer and started writing for newspapers and magazines. And I just got hooked on those stories and writing about them. And then I started a website called ghostvillage.com. And then that was in 1999. Remember that?
Wow.
Year?
It was on GeoCities, wasn't it?
Yeah. Like my website is now legal. It's 18 years old.
Well, what's it doing later?
It's
it can vote now.
It can vote and it can process credit cards. So go ahead and do whatever you want. So yeah, no, it's just been this wild ride. And then I started writing books and then working on ghost adventures. And I'm fortunate to be able to just do a lot of different things in and around the paranormal. And I've been doing it full time since 2004.
That's awesome.
Very awesome.
When I think you talk about growing up next to Ed and Lorraine Warren and how in the New England, it's not as unusual per se to have ghost stories or be like, hey, this house is 250 years old. There's going to be weird stuff associated with it. Did you have a singular experience or something that happened to you where you turned from somebody who maybe like, oh, I thought this stuff was cool to, and then I saw her face and I'm a believer? Like, did you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I did. And ironically, it was not in childhood. As a kid, I would have sleepovers at friends' haunted houses, and I didn't think they were lying to me, but I didn't have the experience. So I was just kind of like on the fence. I'm like, okay, well, these stories are around. I don't think everybody's lying about it, but I just haven't seen anything. That didn't happen until I was already writing about ghosts. I was writing about ghosts since the mid-'90s for newspapers and magazines, and then the website. So my first experience happened in 2003, and it happened in Paris, France, when I was in the catacombs of Paris. Oh. And I was down there. The catacombs are this network, this 300 kilometers of tunnels all underneath Paris. And it happened because 2,000 years ago, it was a Roman outpost, which evolved into a town, which evolved into a city, and they found all this great limestone to build buildings with. And over time, the buildings are getting more compact and so on, and they were tunneling now to get more limestone. And when you build a city, you put the cemeteries on the outskirts, which is what they did in Paris. But then over 300, 400, 500 years, the outskirts aren't the outskirts anymore. And the city had sprawled and encircled some of the cemeteries. And by the mid-1700s to 1800s, there's no more room to bury the dead. So they had two problems. One, buildings are collapsing because they're getting big and heavy, and the ground underneath is hollow from all the tunnels. And two, the cemeteries are overflowing with corpses and humanity, and just the smell is awful. People are getting sick. So they close these tunnels and they move just literally 60 generations of Parisians down into the tunnels. These bones are everywhere. So I'm down there and I speak un petit peu français. So I'm kind of fumbling my way. My français is merde, as they say locally.
Ooh, I'm going to have to bleep it now.
We guys are
What do you mean? That's not on the FCC list of words. So anyway, so I go down there and I'm walking through these tunnels. I'm about 6'2" and I'm making lefts and rights. And then eventually I see this doorway that says in French, stop, this is the Empire of the Dead. And I walk through and there's millions upon millions of skeletons in this very macabre pattern just all around me. And walking through one hallway where the bones were fingertip to fingertip wide, I saw what looked like a man, the shadow of a man, go from the right side to the left and back again. And in that moment, I just froze. And I said, okay, wait a minute. I know no one came up from behind me because they would have bumped into me. Then I'm thinking every rational thing I possibly can. Is there a little side tunnel and someone popped in and I looked and no? And could it be a shadow from a light? No, the lights are at my shoulders aiming down. And I ran out of every single word but one, and that's ghost. And in that moment, I went, oh my God, this is what everyone's talking about. Because I'd already interviewed hundreds of people about their ghost experience at that point. Now it's thousands upon thousands. But in that moment, I realized, I'm not psychic, sensitive, or otherwise. I didn't ask for it. I wasn't looking for it. I never assume it's going to happen. But there I was, and it happened. And it took.
Well, you were asking for something because you did go to an underground tunnel full of bones.
Yeah, no, I guess I was asking for something. And funny part of the story, as I leave, there was a guard at the exit, and I had a bag with me that had like cameras in there and some recording equipment and notebooks and stuff like that. And as I come out, he said, hey, I need to search your bag. And I went, oh, well, usually they search you going into a place, but whatever. So they looked, and I went, oh my God, you're looking for bones. And he said, yeah. And he turned around, and there was a table that had like a skull and a leg bone and an arm bone. And he said, that's from this morning. And I went, oh my, this is a consistent, ongoing, every day, every hour problem. And that's got to be, I'm not an overly superstitious guy, which is weird, right? But that's got to be bad luck to sneak a bone out of there. And I did not.
You would think
I did not sneak a bone out.
I wanted to ask about, so that was like your first real experience. And, I wanted to kind of ask about that because, I've obviously been interested in this stuff for forever. And interviewed people and such. And I always had some skepticism, like, a lot, bordering on cynicism for a while there. But recently I have had some experiences, but they're just so fleeting. And then regular life, you're just back right into regular life a second later. So I just wondered, like, how many people, like, really discount real experiences they might be having because they are so fleeting. I don't think many people have that experience where the ghost actually sits down and has a long, thoughtful conversation with them. It's more like you glimpse something just for a moment, and then it's gone, and you're into the crush of normalcy and banality. So, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, it's easy. I tell everyone, and I'll tell this to you as well. There's only one judge who matters, and that's you, the person who had the experience. When someone comes up to tell me about their experience, I can't judge it unless I was there when it happened. And they say, do you see that thing over there? And I can either say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. I can't judge someone else's personal human experience. If you were to come up to me and tell me how much you love your children or your pet, I can't really judge that either. There's no quantifiable way to judge your capacity to love a child or a spouse or a partner or a pet. Just like if we watched a movie and you said it was the funniest movie ever, I can't judge humor. There's no scale that we can all agree on.
I can judge humor.
Anger. I'm glad someone can. But you know what I mean? So all these human emotions it is an emotional human experience. Psychology is not an exact science. You can't predict human behavior, to the minute kind of thing. So if you have an experience and you perceive it as a ghost, then that's for you to judge and you to take that with you. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day what other people think about it, unless you're one of those kind of people that wants to make everybody happy, but then you're kind of miserable and I don't want to be your friend.
So when you had your
please be our friend.
When you had your experience, Jeff, and you're the first time, and like you said, you've been writing about this for a long time. It's something you're into all your life, and then you're in, the magical land of Paris, and it's awesome. Now I'm trying to get this through my head because you go down to the catacombs, and oftentimes there's a line of people. As you're walking through, in a museum kind of way, the lights are kind of dim down there. And there's those little displays. So were there people behind you? Were there people in front of you? Was the shadow walk in front of you, like the path, or was it against the wall? Like, can you just give us a little more detail on that?
Sure. Yeah, there was no one there. Absolutely no one. I went in a unique entrance because I knew somebody.
Okay.
And there was no one down there until I left. And I've been back since, by the way. That I went back a few years later and went right back to the same spot, ready for that ghost to come out again. And it did not. So I picture a long straight tunnel, and somewhere about 30%, a third of the way down, something walks across, 2 legs, arms. I mean, I couldn't make out features, and went to the other side, and then it kind of went back. So there's no one else around me, no one way down the tunnel, no one behind me, no one anywhere. And I didn't see anybody until I came out and came back to the surface. So yeah, no, believe me, I try to rule all that stuff out. And I get how you can even question your own senses. Am I jet lagged? Am I this? Am I that? I mean, it was 11 o'clock in the morning. I hadn't been drinking yet, so I get it. I mean, I get all that. But I've also had a few other experiences later where there were 3 other people standing around at the same time. And that I understand from a skeptic's point, my own skeptical point of view is more interesting. So if I say, do you see that? And 3 other people say, I do. Well, I don't believe in mass hallucinations. So, I mean, it's, to me, that was even more compelling when other people could verify the thing that I also saw.
What was that?
Let's go.
I was in court. So that happened. Now, keep in mind, so I've been doing this for literally actually like 20 years now, because I worked on my first paranormal project in 1997. So nice. 20 years. And we were in Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and there were 4 of us on the 3rd floor. And we had just walked through. Waverly Hills is a place where thousands of people have died from tuberculosis. It was a place people went to try to be comfortable, as they were suffering through this disease, get treatments and so on. Some people lived with tuberculosis the rest of their life. Some people died really quickly, and everything in between. So it's a scary place. And as we're walking through the hallway, all the windows are gone. It's all wide open now. And we stood right where there's a bend in the building. So we could look way down this hallway and way down this hallway, and chatting 1 a.m, 4 of us. And suddenly about 15, 20 feet down, it was 3 doors down on the left, a man stepped out and looked out into the hallway and then stepped back in. And we all stopped talking at the same time. And I said, did you just see that? And someone said, you mean that guy that just walked out? So we run to the door looking everywhere, because it maybe some homeless guys up there we didn't know about, whatever.
Sure.
So we're looking everywhere. And in the time it took us to close that space, the only place that a living person could have gone was either out into the hallway where we were, or out the 3rd story window, and we would have heard the legs breaking and stuff as they hit the ground. So then you look at each other and you go, okay, we all saw the same thing. We all reacted the same way, and now it's not there. And that, I say, if not a ghost, I don't have another word for you. I can't promise there's life after death. I've never died. But I can promise I can't figure out what that was.
So if you guys are interested at home learning more about Waverly Hills, we do an interview with Christopher St. Booth, who shot a movie in Waverly Hills, Spooked, a documentary, and then he shot like a horror film called... I think it's got several. I think Dead Still is one of the names. That particular one, I think there's like 3 names, like Death Asylum or something like that. But we'll put that link in the show notes, and you'll be able to find that link to learn more about Waverly Hills, where Jeff had a multiple user experience, but a multiple witness.
Yeah.
Experience.
And and I think too, part of it is, this gets down to, well, what is a ghost? And I think ghosts are here because we need them. We need them in some way. There's no ghost without a living person. Not that I found anyway. I don't think they exist in a vacuum. And if they do exist in a vacuum, it actually doesn't matter. And this gets back to a really old philosophical question, right? If the tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And I actually have an answer to that. And the answer to that is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it makes a sound or not. And that's a totally egocentric, humanistic way to view the world. I understand, but that's my limitation. I am a human. And that's my worldview. It's all I know. So if that tree is falling right now, it's irrelevant to me whether it makes a sound or not, unless I'm there or a reliable witness is there to hear it. And that includes a camera, right? I mean, a camera is still, I view that as an extension of a human, because we have to review it. So anyway, so I think when we go to places like Waverly Hills, we're connecting to the past. That's what we do. We are all a product of the past. We're a product of our parents who raised us, our friends, the communities we lived in, and all the history that left a mark on those locations and all the places we visit. Some people have a huge influence, like hopefully our parents. Some people have a really minor one, like the person that served you coffee the other day at the coffee shop. It doesn't matter. Everyone has some sort of influence, and we're human beings. And I don't call it psychic or whatever. I just call it empathy to kind of connect. You go to a place like Waverly and you imagine what it must have been like to go in there and think, oh my God, this could be my last address. This could be the last stop. I'm sick, really sick. I know tons of people die from this disease I have. And here I am going to this hospital that treats just this, where people are going to be leaving daily in a bag. And when you go there, I think it's to be human is to just try to tune into that. I mean, if you ignore it, why are you even there? If you're going to go there and ignore that kind of thing. So maybe in tuning in, we summon something, we conjure it. I don't know, but the experiences happen again and again in places like that.
What can you say about processing? I mean, for me, one of the experiences I had, I'm not going to go into the details, except to say I did see an orb with my eyes, and which is kind of funny because orbs on video, orbs in photography. If I had a dime, everybody for every time anybody came and showed me a picture like that, and for me, it's probably dust. There's so many things, moisture, lens flare that it could be. But then when you see one with your eyes, zooming past your head.
Oh, he's got it.
I see an orb.
So when you see one, zooming past your head, and then have to turn around and look, to see what just happened there. I mean, wow, that really kind of reframed it for me. But yet it was so fleeting that even though, that night when it happened, we had a podcast right after. So you think I would have mentioned that. And then after that, we had an investigation. And you think I would have mentioned it. And somebody interviewed me for their documentary. You think I might have mentioned it. But I didn't. That was a Saturday. And until that next Monday, I didn't mention it to anybody. I don't know what happened with the processing. And then I call Mike on Monday and I'm like, oh, by the way, something happened.
Yeah.
It's just weird because I'm into it. And yet I have this delay in processing. So I'm wondering what it's like for other people and how much weird stuff maybe actually happens that's just kind of swept under the rug or lost.
Yeah, well, we're all individuals. So some people process something immediately by talking about it to anyone who will listen. Other people, sit on it for the longest time. When I'm interviewing someone about their paranormal experience, like if I'm interviewing them for a book or something where I really want the detail or a documentary, I always interview them 3 times in a row, by the way. This isn't, I'll ask the first question, tell me what happened. And I find that different personality types are going to give you different details on the 3 times you ask. One personality type is going to spill their guts, everything they possibly can, because they understand that's why they're there. Other people might say, I came home from work, there's a little girl standing at the top of the stairs, and then she's gone. I don't know what to make of it. And you go, okay. Well, let's slow that down a minute. So did you have to unlock the door with your key, or was it already unlocked? And in doing that, I know those are mundane details, but what I'm trying to get them to do is slow down the whole sensory experience. And then I ask about senses. Did you smell anything? Did you see anything? Did you hear any buzzing? Was something different about every other time you've come home from work? And you said, and then they start to like, okay, so I took a step. I did put my keys down, which I don't usually do. And then, and you start to hear other details as they're putting themselves back into it. And then you're kind of connecting. And then the third time is I call it cleanup, where it's like anything else we might have missed. Memory is fallible. And that's one of the tricky things about all this. And not only that, when someone has a profound experience and does start to share it with others, there's a natural thing that happens through the nature of folklore and storytelling. And it doesn't make anybody a liar or a bad person, but we naturally start to embellish stories. So, for example, if I went through something and I told someone 1 hour after it happened, that's as close to as accurate as you're going to get as far as how it goes. Because after I've told a few people my profound story, and they start to lean in certain parts, like, really? What happened then? And at that part of the story, that I'm on stage now. I'm gonna add a little flair that I hadn't added before, and that's one of the things that naturally occurs. We don't mean to, but we realize we have a rapt audience, and we're going to do it. And the story is going to change, just like the telephone game. So for a person like me and folks like you, where you're out there already saying, "Hey, we're freaks. We're into this weird stuff," and someone has an experience and says, "Okay, this is what went down last night. Can I talk to you about it?" I think you're going to get as close to the mark as you can possibly get, because the story will change. And I've also seen people who a year later, after I've interviewed them, said, you know what, I don't think that was a ghost anymore at all. I think I was just overtired or whatever, because they've told the story and they've been ridiculed by enough people that they now feel embarrassed and don't want to share it. So maybe, Allison, when you saw your orbs, you're like, how many times have I scoffed at orb pictures and photos and said, dude, that's one dusty room, and now suddenly you have this visual experience, and a little bit of embarrassment makes you sit on it for a while. I don't know. I mean, we're all individuals, but that's how some people tick.
Thank you.
When we talk about processing and we talk about how a story evolves over time and how folklore evolves over time, and you've really gotten into the folklore of New England.
Yeah.
Have you known anything in particular, maybe a story you heard as a kid or something that excited you that you eventually went to investigate and either found it remarkably different or you found it way more accurate than you thought it was ever going to be?
Both.
Okay.
And it's the same story, right? So I can give you an example of both way more incredible than you ever would have guessed and incredibly accurate at the same time. So in Southern Rhode Island, there's the story of a vampire named Mercy Brown. Mercy Brown is a real person. Real person.
Does Mercy Brown, that sounds like the name of a funk band or something like that.
Yeah, no, for sure, real person. I've seen her grave. I've seen the grave of her family, and she's well documented in the newspaper accounts and so on. So in the 1890s, the Southern Rhode Island especially was hard hit with consumption, tuberculosis. And what happens when a plague circulates in a community like tuberculosis is that people start to lose rational thought. And this is normal, and it's happened before. It happened with the Black Plague in Europe. It happens all the time. And vampires have been around for centuries and centuries. And vampires become scapegoats for things. So, for example, you live in a town, and you live on a street. Maybe there's 4 houses. In one house, everybody in the house dies from this disease. The next house down, nobody even is sick. The next house down, one person dies. People in the community start looking at this going, okay, they were sinners. They were bad people and God punished them. The house where everybody died. This house, obviously God shows favor. This house, metza. So one person was particularly bad because science doesn't have an answer for you. I don't know why they all died and this one didn't. We have a little better understanding today, the spread of germs, washing your hands, so on and so forth. But at the time, they didn't have a better answer other than, I don't know, And so the Brown family was really hit hard by consumption. First, the mother died. A year later, the oldest daughter died. Then the only son gets sick, and they sent him out to the West Coast into the mountains because the dry air was good for people with consumption. And then Mercy gets sick, and she dies in January of 1892. And that's important to the story because in New England, in the northern climates here, when you die in the winter, they don't bury you right away because the ground's frozen. So a lot of these old cemeteries have these little stone buildings called keeps where bodies would be placed in there until the spring, and then it would thaw, and then you could dig a hole and put them in. So Mercy's placed in the keep. Now, after Mercy died, Edwin came back. And keep in mind, as a kid, all I'd heard was that there was a vampire in Southern Rhode Island, and we all hear this stuff growing up. But yeah, did you hear about the vampire? The vampire. So Edwin comes back because he doesn't want his dad to be alone. And when he returns, he's taking a downturn, and it's not looking good at all. So doctors don't have an answer. Science doesn't have an answer, but folklore does. And someone whispers to George Brown, the father, you are the victim of a vampire. Find the vampire, and you might be able to save your son. And anyone with kids knows if you have a 1 in a billion chance of saving your kid, you'll take it. You will take the 1 in a billion shot because you're desperate. So the first place to look is the family. And come March, 3 months later, they exhume the bodies of his wife. They exhume the bodies of his daughter. And they find that they're decomposing as one would expect. And then they go to the keep, the crypt, and they open it up, and Mercy hadn't been buried yet, and they find her body had moved. And there's a trickle of blood in the corner of her mouth. And they even said she made a sound, a groan, when they pulled her body from the casket, and she hadn't decomposed whatsoever. And all of this is just smoking gun proof that she's clearly the vampire. The Providence Journal covered all this. The Providence Journal is a major newspaper, covered all this and said, look at what these nutso bumpkins are doing. in southern Rhode Island, And a doctor then surgically removed the heart from Mercy, found liquid blood. This is just, smoking gun number 4 or 5 at this point. And they burned that heart on a nearby rock, mixed it in an oil elixir, and fed it to Edwin to break the spell, to kill the vampire that must be Mercy Brown. Now, this all must sound like a tall tale, like completely crazy, but it actually all makes perfect scientific sense. If you die in a cold New England winter, decomposition is going to happen really slowly, if at all. So that's why her body didn't look decomposed. It really didn't warm up yet. The other thing that can happen is your blood congeals and liquefies over and over throughout the decomposition process as soon as the bacteria starts to eat your body from the inside. She was never embalmed. This was before the days of embalming. So she's not embalmed. As the bacteria start to devour your insides, it releases carbon dioxide, which can fill your chest cavity with air. If that air gets pushed back over your vocal cords, you can absolutely make a groan. You can make all kinds of sounds, as that happens. Your body can move, it can sit up, it can do all these things that can look completely preternatural. However, it's a normal part of decomposition, especially a really slow one that's happening in the cold winter months. Edwin died anyway. Mercy Brown was then buried properly, and the story to this day survives. Yes, she was a vampire in that she was a scapegoat for a horrible disease that took over a community and killed a lot of people. No, I don't think she was, some kind of demonic creature or whatever, but she was indeed a vampire by the earliest definition before it really radically changed just literally a couple years after her death, when Bram Stoker wrote a book called Dracula, which took the vampire into a whole new realm, a whole new direction. And now they're sparkly teenagers, in the sunlight, and the beautiful people. They were always walking corpses. They were dead people who fed on the vitality, the lifeblood of the living. And so that's what Mercy was, at least conceptually, until, the inevitable happened and Edwin died anyway, and George Brown lived out the rest of his days alone. Tragic story, born here in New England.
What a great story. And what I love is that we just kind of glossed over is that, like, oh yeah, Mercy, that, they dig her up and she was already dead. Poor Edwin had to eat the heart. Like, somebody had to prepare that. Yeah. Like, they had to prepare, a little girl's, maybe not a little girl, but
Yeah, she was a teenager, yeah.
A teenager's heart. Somebody had to like, I don't know, cook it, put it in the microwave. Like, you just,
Well, they didn't have microwaves then.
Fine.
It would have exploded
how
anyway.
Does he do it? It's like,
how do I know that?
Do you spice it?
No, it's a pretty simple recipe. But desperate times, and that's the thing that it's so easy for us to forget and sit here in this internet age where we can Google things and stuff like that. You're so desperate, and you want to, I'm total conjecture here. I'm just guessing.
Sure.
Maybe even Edwin was like, Dad, this is nuts, but it's so important to you that what the hell, I'll try it. Because I'm looking into your eyes, Dad, and seeing the absolute desperation. And not only that, I recognize I'm dying. I'm going to die. And if this fixes it, what the hell? Now, here's the crazy thing. This recipe.
Wait, now's the crazy thing.
Yes, ready? Here it is. That recipe has worked before.
Whoa.
That's why people do it. Now, yeah, because it only has to work 1 and 2 million times for people to say it has worked. And did it work, or was that person naturally going to get better anyway? That's the thing, sure. You could take the skeptical point of view and be like, yeah, the person was probably on the mend as it was, and that elixir was completely irrelevant. But it doesn't matter. They got better. People remembered the process and passed it along.
Well, we've started to talk about New England Legends, so let's talk about your show, New England Legends, because that's available now on Amazon Prime.
As soon as you're done listening to this, you can go on your phone and you can watch it.
That's right. No, we did. We started this for PBS years ago, and it's just all these great stories. I've got my partner in this, a guy named Tony Dunn. He and I just love legends. It turns out we were born in the same hospital about 10 months apart. We figured that out, the first project we worked on. And we just love these great stories because they're part of the fabric of our community. We've got the historic buildings that get preserved. We've got, historic reenactments that happen all the time, from the first shot fired of the Revolutionary War to Paul Revere's house in Boston and so on. But these legends and folklore I think are just as important as the buildings and things like that. And we're trying to just take snapshots of them. Just like I told you about Mercy Brown, there's so many funky, weird stories, whether it's a haunted place or, for example, one of my favorite ones that we covered was the Shakers, the Shaker community in a town called Harvard, Massachusetts, not to be confused with the university. It's a small town outside of Boston. They had the Shaker Fountain of Youth, and they sold Shaker medicinal spring water. And you could find the ads from the 1880s, like cures, you name it, everything, dropsy, and like all kinds of crazy things, and promotes long life. And that's one of those things. This is before the days of truth in advertising. You could say anything you want in an ad, and you say, yeah, okay, you live forever if you drink this spring water. That's very funny. But then you go to Harvard and you look at the Shaker Cemetery. And we filmed all this. You walk through the cemetery and you see all these headstones, aged 91, aged 92, age 88, died in 1843. At the time these people died, the life expectancy in the United States was in the 40s, if you take into account things like infant, mortality rates and so on. These people were more than doubling the life expectancy. And so you start to go, well, wait a minute now, like what's going on here? So you start looking.
The real question is, where do I get some of that snake oil?
We found it.
Waukesha. We have it in Waukesha too.
That's right.
So we found it. So we there's this little hut out there in the woods, and I had seen it years ago when I was working on a book. Someone took me. It's got an old rusted padlock on it. But this time we went back with our film crew, and this was the well house. And they used to have a pipe that would run down to their community where they would bottle it and sell it. A road was put in the 1950s. It's long gone. It's all dismantled. But that little stone house is still there, and it's maybe 5 feet tall. And it's got that rusted padlock. So we went out there with the whole Harvard Historical Commission. We had keys, we had bolt cutters, we were ready to get in. And I was thinking, how cool would it be if there's like a dead body in there, like Indiana Jones? and one of the guys was like, how cool would it be if there was a live body in there?
Right.
And I'm like, good point. I'm totally stand corrected here. So we pry this old door open and look down, and there's maybe like 3-4 inches of crystal clear cold water coming up through the silt and sand. And so I did what I think anybody would do. I dipped the jar down there very gently so I didn't stir up the silt, and got water. And we brought champagne flutes, and we poured some water around, and we drank it. And I have not aged a day since then. So, whatever.
Guess we know
There
where our
it
next
is.
tour stop's going to be, guys.
So we think about the Quaker. We always think of the
Shakers.
Quaker, right? The
Shakers.
Shakers versus Quakers. What's the difference? Like one guy loves the oats, and the other guy
No, there's a huge difference.
loves Elvis. What?
So the Quakers are still around. You know why? Because they have sex.
That helps.
The Shakers do not, and they're gone.
But even though they live
forever because it turns out we learned a little more about the Shakers while we were there. So it turns out the Shakers keep the men and women separate pretty much at all times, including church, separate entrances, and so on. You can never be born a Shaker. No one ever was. You choose it somewhere in life. You may have had kids of your own, and then you say, this isn't for me. I'm going to go become a Shaker. And they're called Shakers because as they're praying, they would go into these like violent shaking things, this like ecstatic sort of prayers. And that's why people called them the Shakers. They lived very clean lives, no alcohol, no drugs, no sex, clean living, lots of sleep, lots of prayer, and maybe magic water. And so maybe that had something to do with their longevity, I guess, possibly, but I'm going with the water because I'm not going to give up those other things. So here we are.
Okay, that's awesome. So that was an exciting New England legend you covered, and so that's one of the shows that are currently going to be on Amazon Prime, and then you also have a stage show that is going on too as well.
So that's something that came together a couple of years ago. I've got a photographer friend named Frank Grace, and he takes these great eerie pictures of all kinds of haunted places, and so he and I did a calendar back in 2000. God, what was it? 2013. We did this haunted New England calendar. Yeah, there it is. And so we've been doing a calendar every year. And I said, man, these pictures are amazing. So what we did was we put together some storytellers from New England, like Carl Johnson, who used to be on the Ghost Hunter show, my friend Tim Weisberg, who's a radio host, Andrew Lake from my 30-odd minute show. He's got a great voice. These guys are just passionate about ghost stories. And the idea was to create, and I'm not aware of anything else like this, a nonfiction stage performance of ghosts in history set to photos. And I know it sounds crazy. So picture a ghost tour where you don't have to leave the seat. So, for example, one of the stories we did was the Lizzie Borden house, where a screen that fills the whole stage with Frank's photo of the Lizzie Borden house comes up, and it's creepy looking. And then we come out and we say, "Welcome to Fall River. We're here at the Lizzie Borden house. Let's go inside." And the image will change to the inside. And we go through the house almost like a tour. And this is where Andrew Borden was murdered. And this is what happened. And then we talk about some of the ghost sightings in the room in very much the present tense, the here and now, and kind of like these short stories. And then the next storyteller comes on and tells a different story. And so it's something that we've done a few times now. We're doing it again this fall. The stories are going to change. The pictures will change each year. And the whole idea is to make it this annual Halloween production. And so we made a documentary about not just some of the performance, but why we care so much about ghost stories. And we really explored that. The great thing about them is that there's an elephant in the room, right? The elephant in the room is death. We're talking about something that happens after we die, whether we're remembered in some cosmic way, whether we stick around in some spiritual way or otherwise. That's one of the questions that Ghost Story begs. If you're a skeptic and you just love ghost stories, fine, come enjoy. If you are really into this and you want to go hunt them, that's fine too. But we don't share EVP or ghost photos or anything like that. It's just the stories and the history. Because to me, that's the part that endures. We can argue about, well, did someone whisper when you recorded that or whatever, but the stories endure and they become part of our collective consciousness. They become something we share, something we all contribute to. And that's what I love best about all this, is that sharing in that tapestry that is part of a community and part of who we are.
When you talk about the EVPs and the evidence and kind of connecting it to your work, because you've worked in the ghost hunting side of TV.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will have remembered you and stuff from that particular aspect. So how did you move from being historian, collecting stories and stuff like that, to then being a location researcher for a rough and tough group of ghost adventurers?
Yeah, so that happened. So Ghost Adventures started as a documentary, and I didn't work on that. But then in 2008, when they got picked up by the Travel Channel, Zach called me and he'd heard our mutual friend Dave Schrader had said, you need a guy that knows haunts everywhere. Jeff's the guy. So it was not just scouting locations, but also giving them the history of the building and the location and what happened there, finding the people that have stories to share to come on. Because the beginning part of the show is produced. There's no apology for that. We want to set the stage. Mm-hmm. Other shows are trying to prove if a place is haunted or not haunted. We're going someplace because it's haunted. If a show really wanted to be truly objective and say we're going to go determine if a place is haunted or not, why not go to like the brand new Walmart that was built 3 months ago and investigate there and say, well, wow, we found ghosts. Who would have thought?
That would be your control in the experiment, would be the building that was just built where nobody's died. Maybe the souls of the people who worked there have died, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's the control. And no one would watch that episode because it would be really boring. It would be not interesting. And there's no contextual setting for it. So I get it. But I'm not doing anything different for Ghost Adventures that I don't do before for books and that I haven't done since. They want the history, and we want to get that part right. We want to set the stage. And so that's what I've been doing for the show. And then once they start investigating, hey, it's all on them. Whatever happens, happens. Once the lights go out and they start the nighttime investigation, I don't have anything to do with that part of it.
So you're the substance. You're the guy that makes them look
no,
good.
I mean, I think it's a whole.
Well, that's my interpretation.
Well, thank you for saying that, but I think it's I can tell you from our focus groups or whatever, people seem to enjoy the investigation part more. That's what they tune in for, and that's cool. Hey, whatever people like, that's great. I'm just grateful that the show is still going since 2008. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's pretty remarkable that we're working on season 14. I mean, you know how many TV shows make it 14 seasons?
Doctor Who?
Not many.
Yeah, but like we're in the single digit percentile of like shows that can last that long. Mm-hmm. And how many people can continually to work on a show for 14 seasons, I may have broken a record somewhere,
Right,
So,
you hit the jackpot.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love it. And it allows me to do all the other stuff that I do. And I'm super grateful to the people that watch it and enjoy it. And I'm grateful that I get to have the life I live. And that's certainly part of it.
Well, one thing I think you did make a great point. You're like, well, the focus groups like the investigation. They have to eat their vegetables before they get to dessert.
I agree. Yeah. No, and I've said along. So, for example, if you had a show, and I've seen shows like this, and I'm not naming any names, but they're like, oh, this was built in 1850. Let's look for ghosts. And to me, that's like if you were to go see a stage production, a play, and there's no setting whatsoever, and all the actors walk out completely in black, and they start acting. And in your mind, you're going, oh, what year is it? 1950, 2015, 1820? I mean, is it a space? Are we in space? Are we on the farm? So you
set and setting.
That's right. So to me, the history is the set and setting, and we're putting the stage up. We're letting you know this is the era we're in. Civil War. We're in the 1950s with mobsters. That's the thing that has to help you contextualize whatever might happen during the investigation. So yeah, it's cool if people like the ghost hunt better, but I agree with you. Vegetables before dessert.
And have you had something happen during one of the investigations that has ended up adding to the folklore of a place or adding to the stories and saying like, when you're telling a story and you're like, oh my God, and then we did this for the show and they totally either proved this or, I guess prove is a big word when we're talking about but either they helped solidify the story or add to the folklore of the place. Like part of your work is adding to the folklore. Have you seen that happen?
Yeah, no, and that happens every time any one of these shows comes on. And by the way, it also happens when you, Michael, or anyone else, or Wendy or Allison, when you go to a location and check it out. You just, I heard this place is haunted. So you walk in and you look around and you're like, I don't see any ghosts. You are now part of the story forever. You may tell another person, you know what, I think that story's all hype. They try to sell T-shirts that say we're the most haunted place in America or whatever.
Yeah. I've bought those T-shirts.
No, it's cool. I get it. Or maybe you have an experience you didn't count on and you come home and you tell people, oh, I thought this was just a story, but there was this guy standing in the doorway and then he vanished. And then that becomes part of the story, part of the folklore. So yeah, every time a show is obviously going to have a bigger impact because there's so many viewers. You and I can have an experience and tell a few folks who tell a few others, and it's going to spread slowly. But a TV show suddenly writes a whole new chapter, and this is any TV show, not just Ghost Adventures, writes a whole new chapter into the folklore in one night. It happens. So we live in a time, folklore has always existed, but we live in a time when it spreads and changes and passes from one person to another at light speed. You can tweet a picture or something, and suddenly it's viral in a matter of a couple of hours when it used to take maybe even generations. Now it's just light speed.
Well, let's talk a little bit too about, some of the other things that you've done, Jeff. So recently you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro.
I did.
Tell us about that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's
what
awesome.
What an adventure.
It was really cool. So the story actually starts back in 2015. No, I'd been interested in Kilimanjaro since college. I took 2 semesters of Swahili, which is
Sweet. Can you teach us something in Swahili, Jeff?
Hamjambo, which is hello, all of you.
Okay, all right.
Hamjambo. Okay.
You took me there.
We had another guest in the past, Dr. Martin Walsh, who's an expert in Swahili. He's investigated the Popo Bawa in Zanzibar. So anyway, so what was
So Jambo is like hello. If I just said like Jambo, that's like Jambo. Hi, hello. Hujambo is like hello to just one person. Hamjambo is a group of people. And then there's like these Habari greetings. So I might be like Habari Zakazi, like how is your work? And Habari Asabui, which is good morning. And so it's actually a really easy language to learn. In college, this is a total crazy side story, but I took French.
We love crazy side stories.
I first took French and I failed because my last name is French and I had forgotten that all French teachers are evil. It slipped my
Except
mind.
the one that Allison had a crush on in college. Never mind.
Okay.
That one was evil too, I assure you. It's a prerequisite. You can't get around it. So then I took Spanish and I was getting totally confused. And a friend's like, you got to take Swahili. The professor's amazing. And we had a language requirement. So I took Swahili 1. And in the first day of class, this hand sheepishly goes up in the class because the teacher is a bit of a former celebrity. and someone goes, Dr. Leonard, I heard something. And so he smiles and he puts the syllabus down and he goes, all right, let's do this now. I was the co-founder of Sha Na Na. I was on before Hendrix at Woodstock. And everyone's like, his voice was awesome. Like this baritone.
Is it Bowser?
No, everyone remembers Bowser.
Bowser doesn't speak Swahili.
He didn't have the cigarettes.
No. So this guy was just this awesome voice. And when they got the TV show, he didn't want to do it. So you never saw him on TV. He went to Kenya to find himself, taught English, learned Swahili, became this really renowned linguist and just a great teacher. And I took 4 other courses with him because he was awesome. Anyway, so I've thought about Kilimanjaro because it straddles Kenya and Tanzania right near the equator in Eastern Africa. I was a hiker after college, got out of it. So in 2015, I lost my brother-in-law Chris to cancer. He was 46 at the time. He was 43, I think, when he was diagnosed, and it was out of nowhere. Just he had some health problems, and at 43, no one would think you're at stage 4 cancer with tumors everywhere.
God,
so it was awful. And so he left behind a 6-year-old son, my nephew, and 2 children from a previous marriage. And so I wanted to do something to honor him. And it all kind of came together. About 6 months later, a friend of mine who works for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society was at one of my paranormal events. And I'd done stuff for them in the past to raise money. And she said, hey, Jeff, we got this new thing, this new fundraiser. I think you'd dig it. I want to tell you about it. And I'm like, okay, whatever, Amy, if I can, I'll help if I can. I'm really busy. And she goes, we're putting a team together to climb Kilimanjaro. And I just froze in my tracks. I went, what now? Where? And she said, Kilimanjaro. And I was just like, I'm in. I got to figure out a lot more than that, but I'm pretty sure I'm in. And so we started training. Started raising money for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And that was from pretty much September of 2016 right up until March. We left on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th of this year. And so it was just a whole lot of training, hiking in mountains and getting out there in the cold and in the frigid New England winters and getting up there. But total bucket list dream come true. And I'll tell you, it was a lot more of a spiritual thing than I ever would have guessed. So we get out there, and it's going to take 6 days to get to the top and 2 days to get down because we go up one way and come down a more direct route to a different way. And that's 6 days without a shower, or 8 days without a shower, which is, it's just no flushing toilets, not a single luxury, as the song says. So, but I do it for Kilimanjaro, and going up there, it's amazing how when you're that detached from everything, no email, no texts, nothing, it's liberating in a way. But as we get up into the higher altitude, the summit night, which is where it really turns spiritual for me, we start from Barafu Base Camp, which is 15,300 feet in elevation. And at that point, there's 1/2 of the oxygen that we have down here. And it's pretty tough to breathe, but we're going up to 19,341 feet. So we got to go 3.1 miles and 4,000 feet in elevation. And it's exponentially worse the higher you go. And we start at midnight because the whole point, it's going to take 8 hours to go 3 miles. I can run 3 miles in 26 minutes.
Right.
So, but it's going to take 8 hours. so we start at midnight with headlamps, and you got to picture this. You can't see anything. It's total darkness. And we're making our way up through the highest part of the peak to Uhuru Peak. And as we get climbing higher and higher, all we see is a glow, maybe a 3-foot glow around your feet from your headlamp. That's all you can see. And at about 17,000 feet, I didn't think I'd make it. I couldn't breathe anymore. I'm breathing as deep as I possibly can to get enough air. And at one point, I had unzipped my jacket to go to the bathroom, and I couldn't zip my jacket back up. And there was nothing wrong with the zipper. I didn't have the motor skills to get the zipper together to zip it up. My brain is lacking oxygen. And I thought, okay, just a little more. I'll just follow the feet. But then around 5 a.m., I turned around and there's this purple right along the horizon all the way across. And I realized, oh man, the sun is coming. I'll just make it to sunup. And by the time we hit the volcanic rim at a place called Stella Point, the sun breaks. There's this sea of clouds far, far below. And at that moment, the temperature warms up 15 degrees. I still can't breathe. But I realized I'm looking around, there's no bugs, there's no birds, there's no animals, there's no moss, there's no grass. Nothing but nothing grows at 19,000 feet in elevation. There's no resources for any living thing. The Maasai people call that peak the house of God for a reason, because that's where God dwells and we're not meant to go there. And at that moment, when I saw the sun, I realized I'm going to make it, even though there's another hour to go and I still can't breathe. And something has granted me access because we don't belong here. I mean, we passed signs, markers where people had died from the altitude. They died like 2 years ago. There's a marker. It said 2015, so-and-so, attitude before altitude, the epitaph read on a little stone marker. And we have no business being there, and yet something allowed access. And it just trudging along that last half mile, which took another hour, and touching the sign at 19,341 feet, the very highest point in the whole continent of Africa. I laughed, I cried at the same time, and then I held up a picture of my brother-in-law, Chris, and posed for a photo with it so I could give it to my nephew. And it was just an absolutely spiritual, life-altering experience, and one I'll never forget, and just grateful that I got to do it. And I raised over $17,000 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
That is something else. That is
So
something
sorry
else.
for your loss.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. And perhaps, Mike, we should link in the show notes to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society
great.
so people can see how they can
Sure.
still help. And Jeff, what occurred to me as you were telling that story is something of a personal motto that I thought of the other day, which is scared is just another way to spell sacred.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just wondered if you had anything to say about that idea.
I think, I really view all of this as a kind of a spiritual journey as well as a historic one and a mental one and everything else. And sometimes we got to get ourselves out of our comfort zones, especially it's funny to me how many people are, let's face it, middle-aged who are into the paranormal, right? We've engineered these really comfortable lives. We've got the friends we want. We got rid of the friends we don't,
But you drank that
I
water.
did.
Yeah.
That's true. So I get to stay here. But our lives become kind of routine and comfortable, and we need to shake it up. And sometimes we shake it up by climbing mountains. Sometimes we shake it up by going to abandoned buildings at midnight under the full moon. And we want to be scared. We want to tap into that primal thing that lets us know we're human and we're going through something that's not just, go to work, come home, cut the lawn, do the laundry, cook the dinner, do the dishes. That humdrum life that we have, we crave this. And I think being afraid, first of all, there's a physiological thing that happens when we're afraid. We release adrenaline. Our senses get sharper. This is fight or flight stuff. This is stuff that goes back for all of human history, and it allows our brains to record what's happening, because if we survive, we can pass it along to our children and make our lineage, all the stronger and so on. Mm-hmm. So I think being scared and putting yourself into frightening situations, whatever it is good for us. And it does connect us to these primal parts of us that are easy to lose as we get older and we live in a world with Twitter and Facebook and Google and everything else. I think it's a good thing. And so I'm totally on board with scared and sacred being close enough.
Well, I think that's a great point, Jeff, because you're talking about in the way that you feel the need to be tested. Like when you're younger, it's almost that the testing is just getting by. The testing is just making your own life and separating yourself from your family and your parents and enough that you can establish yourself as your own. And then once you kind of get that, it's like, well, all right then.
Yeah.
What do I do? Is it going to be climb a mountain, or is it going to be try to do a marathon, or is it going to be, things that test yourself in a way like that? And I guess the paranormal is on that same level. And you're right. The people that do, I think about the Facebook advertising that goes in to some of these ghost tours. And I think about that certain, women between 35 and 50, that's our market, because they're going to bring out the husbands or boyfriends or second husbands, kind of thing. And, but it is that certain, like, you feel like you've beaten something by getting past it. And once you're there, well, what do we do to keep this exciting? What do we do so it's not just so we're not ghosts here?
So here's the thing, studying the paranormal, whether that's Bigfoot, cryptids, ghosts, UFOs, whatever, I would lump all that under paranormal. You're asking the biggest questions that humans have asked for as long as we've been walking upright. And that is, with ghosts, what happens after we die? With aliens, are we alone in the universe? And with Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and stuff like that, do we know every creature that walks our planet with us? These are the questions that people have been asking forever. And it's something we all have to come to grips with for ourselves. I don't think there'll ever be consensus, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. There's never been consensus on religion. And think of the resources those guys have.
Yeah.
I mean, they got billions and billions of dollars and followers and land and real estate and all that other stuff. And
right.
We're just a bunch of we have EMF meters.
Right.
Right. But we can still make a difference. And, we're talking about a lot of big stuff here. So, I wanted to mention, because maybe a lot of people don't know that you also started a foundation for those affected by the Sandy Hook tragedy. And I was really paying attention to that. I teach 4th grade and I'm on safety committee. So we talk about lockdown plans. We, talk about Sandy Hook and what happened and, what that means to us. And so can you tell us a little bit about why you started the Newtown Memorial?
So I went to Sandy Hook Elementary School as a kid, and I was there in 5th grade. And my family still lives in the same house. My parents still live in the same house that I grew up in. And that house, the way the roads work, if you're going to go anywhere, whether it's downtown to get pizza or groceries or travel somewhere else, you go by the Sandy Hook Elementary School every day. It's less than 1 mile. And that's the way to go to anywhere. So I've passed it countless times since I left the elementary school. And I had friends from high school that taught there, friends that a buddy that I graduated with is now the assistant principal of Sandy Hook Elementary School. So I have a lot of connections. And of course, being in a town that small, people directly affected when it happened. We had just had a little mini reunion, high school reunion, in November. It was the day after Thanksgiving. And of course, it was just about 2 weeks later that the Sandy Hook event happened. And so a lot of us were already in touch. And so as soon as it went down, we were, myself and Brian Moriello, who was we kind of founded it together. And he was really the spearhead of it, to be honest. And I said I'd help all I could. We got to do something. We just have to do something. And so we raised about $1.5 million. We were the very first 501c3 to form. We called in help from congressmen and senators, and because if you want to form a 501c3, it typically takes 18 months.
Sure.
Unless you're responding to a specific tragedy, which is the loophole we got through on, and we were able to get help and get it approved in 3 or 4 weeks. One of the problems with Sandy Hook is that so many people were collecting money for Sandy Hook that no one knew if it was legit, where it was going. There were scams, people that weren't audited, and so on. And so everyone was looking for a 501c3. And I know the Red Cross stepped up, but everyone. And then it got political, which is a worse tragedy than what happened, if in some weird way. But we were always just trying to get help to the families and the people affected, and that's what we did. We gave the money to the families, and there's also a lot of people don't understand. There was also a good dozen kids that had to step over all the carnage, and are going to have PTSD and are horribly affected for probably the rest of their lives. But they didn't take a bullet, so no one talks about them and no one tries to get them any help. So that's just some of the collateral damage from that awful event. And the weird thing to me is that my own childhood memories of that place have been kind of overwritten at this point. I remember playing in the schoolyard and listening to Dr. Demento on a tape recorder, during recess. Right. And now it's all gone. It's just, I can't think of Sandy Hook without thinking of that. And it's horrible. And it could happen again.
Well, do you ever have to deal with because there's a certain, element, especially in the paranormal community, and that has to deal with you're raising money for something that's fake.
Yeah, no, that is so deeply, deeply insulting and hurtful when people think that. And I've addressed this before. So on the one hand, I understand why people think that, as well as other conspiracies, because it's easier to believe the conspiracy than the truth. You sleep better at night saying, I've talked to people that are like, there's no dead kids. And I'm like, are you stupid? Are you mean? Or both? Which one is it? If you don't think that could happen again tomorrow, that when a suicidal person goes in with, armed for bear with multiple weapons, they could do that again tomorrow. And you're fooling yourself if you think it couldn't happen again tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It absolutely could. Sandy Hook had the same security measures that my daughter's elementary school has. You got to show your license to get in before they buzz you in. Then you go in, and then you got to go to the office. They had that too. He just shot through the door. So it doesn't matter what they had. Schools are not going to install bulletproof glass. They can't even afford books. So yeah, that's really hurtful. And not only that, you'd say, well, what was the agenda? So they could take our guns away? They didn't take our guns away. Nothing happened. Gun laws didn't really change. So the conspiracy theory holds no water whatsoever. Just some people got really, really hurt. And one of the things when I'm out somewhere and I talk about Sandy Hook and someone says, either direction on the gun control debate, it's really, really offensive to me. If the first thing you can think of is get rid of the guns or we need more guns, when I mention Sandy Hook, that we got to get past that. The question you should ask is, how are the families doing now? How's the community been healing? Is there more we can do to help people that were affected? Those are the questions you should ask when someone says, I went to Sandy Hook Elementary School and my family lives there. Not, let's talk about guns. That's right. It's awful.
You don't blame a tornado or something that happens. The first thing you don't say is like, well, the weather man should have really called it. Like it's all irrelevant to the actual tragedy where humans died. And that's the only thing that matters.
I agree. And so that's the thing. And it's very sad that it got so politicized that it almost can't be mentioned anymore without turning into some political debate. And we live in a time when political debates are ripping us apart. Like we can't agree on anything politically anymore. It's this whole post-truth society. Everybody's lying to us. It's all a conspiracy. I mean, it all just feeds itself. So I just try to say like, hey, let's get back to like being objective, good thinkers, and human empathy. I mean, if we can just get back to that, maybe there's hope, and you can do that in your own community. You don't have to, go out and try to change the whole world. Just change your own neighborhood, and then you can start there.
And get back to the people.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Instead of these abstract issues, or as with history, dates and names. I mean, it's not about that. It's about human experience.
And let me add one other thing too. In what comes from tragic places like this, we've done a lot of locations on ghost adventures, and I've been to a lot of places. And some people could consider it really crass to suggest a location's haunted where a tragedy took place. And I've always said I think some places are haunted because they should be haunted, because we should be haunted by what happened there, and we shouldn't forget. And if a ghost serves us and helps us do that, then I applaud that ghost. What is it? What is a ghost anyway? I've yet to truly define it, other than it's simply a connection to our past. How literal we can all debate about, but it is indeed a connection to our past. So a place being haunted, people sometimes get offended saying like, well, you're implying that there's some earthbound spirit that can't move on. I've never found a building or location that's haunted 100% of the time. Otherwise, this would be over. I would have already called in like all the news crews and been like, there's the ghost standing right there.
You'd be counting money right now.
Interview away, ask your questions. But the reality is this stuff is happening not on our terms necessarily. And it's not 100% of the time, which means it's happening for reasons that are beyond our control and for reasons we may not fully understand, other than I can think of a few places that I'm damn glad that are haunted. Because we should remember, I'm glad Gettysburg is haunted. I'm glad that people talk about ghost experiences there almost daily, because that was really awful and bloody in a time when brother against brother, countrymen against countrymen, when our nation almost got torn apart. So let that haunt us forever, I say.
Yeah, and we should be thinking of that in particular.
Yeah,
right now.
For sure.
As we were saying, with all the political debates going on, tearing us apart. But, I wanted to chime in on what you were saying, Jeff, about how certain places should be haunted so that you don't forget. And that's, Mike and Wendy work with me on haunted history tours. And so, that's why I started my haunted history tour, is because there were things that happened in my city that have been forgotten. People that were incredible, just, unbelievable people, but they were there. They existed. They had things to teach us, and they still have things to teach us if we listen. So, that's why I started my haunted history tour, so I could I could bring that back, something that we lost, retrieve that part of collective soul. And I think too that going back to the whole scared versus sacred thing, I think that ghost stories, like people come up to me and they're like, oh, how can you handle being in that haunted location? Well, it's because I guess I have a different perspective on hauntings as an affirmation of life.
Yeah.
That we don't know what it is. Maybe it's not the afterlife, but it's something that can give hope to people. It's something that can make you think a little bit more deeply about what life is all about. And so I don't see it as a scary thing. It's almost scary when things don't happen. When things do happen, then I'm like, whoa, there's more to this life than just the mundane.
Yeah.
And that makes me really excited.
Well, if nothing else, you want to think about what ghost you want to leave behind. And there's a Mexican proverb that I love to quote that says, we all die 3 deaths. And the first death happens when your body expires. And the second death happens when your corpse is laid into the ground. But the third and final death comes somewhere down the line, and it happens when your name is uttered for the last time. And that, to me, kind of sums it all up. I mean, how do you want to be? Shakespeare is still with us. Mozart is still with us. We can name many other figures who are still with us. So how do you want to be remembered? And who will you haunt? I have a...
Yeah, and that's a death that people can come back from.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of, to me, the mission of ghost tourism and writing books is all about, is bringing these untold stories back into our consciousness and bringing these incredible people back to inform our lives.
So, Jeff, if people want to find out your ghost stories, where can they find them? Where can people find you on the webs?
Yeah, so jeffbelanger.com has links to everything that I do, whether it's my lecture tour or events or Amazon Prime videos. Ghostvillage.com's got all my ghostly material is up there. You can check that out as well. And I'm always happy to correspond with anyone that's searching. I think the most important part of all this is just the discussion. I don't have the answers. I don't pretend to, but I think the discussion is a good thing, and we should just keep talking about it.
Absolutely. So please go visit jeffbelanger.com and check out all of his cool stuff. Go on Amazon Prime, watch his shows, throw your money at him because his stuff is awesome.
And come to the Chicago Ghost Conference where we're going to see you, Jeff. So we're looking forward to that.
I know, and thank you guys for offering to buy all my drinks there. I appreciate that.
Hey, as long as you're handling...
I don't think there's enough money.
As long as you're handling the karaoke there, I think it's going to be fun. So, okay, so you guys can find out more on Jeff, and you can find all those links and stuff like that directly to his books and his site. OthersidePodcast.com/152 is where the show notes are going to be. Check out Allison's blog and Milwaukee Investigations and MilwaukeeGhosts.com. And let's go to this week's song.
Well, Mike, we just have to have him back on the show.
I would say that Jeff is just such an entertaining guest, and we're going to see him at the Michigan Paragon in August.
That's right. Yes, excellent. And we want to thank Allison from MilwaukeeGhosts.com.
Yes, Allison for setting it up.
Yes, and for being on the interview with us. Mm-hmm. As always, excellent times.
And always having lovely questions.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
So my favorite part of the interview today, number one, was Jeff talking about the catacombs.
Oh, yeah,
because
so cool.
I had Paris was my favorite vacation I've ever been on. I loved it.
Mais oui, bien sûr.
And I love Paris. And the catacombs were very intense, incredible experience.
So intense.
Like a sacred kind of thing.
Yes.
Going back to Allison's, a scared, sacred is just another way to say scared.
That's right. Yeah.
I enjoyed that story, but the story I liked better was Mercy Brown, the Rhode Island vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Like, first of all, you're the vampire in the smallest state.
Yeah, that...
Like, when you drive through Rhode Island, it takes like 15 minutes.
You blink and you miss it.
Right. Hey, was that Rhode Island? Like, did we pay a toll?
Aww.
I don't even remember. Like, there was probably a bridge. We probably paid $6.
Cute little Rhode Island.
But the fact is, like, that Mercy Brown story stuck with me.
That was a really good one.
Yeah. And so the idea that they dug up her body, they burned her heart, and they fed it to her sick brother, and he died anyway, was just a perfect metaphor, I think, for the fact that when you, let's say you're fighting with somebody
Mm-hmm.
and you bring up the past,
Ooh.
right?
Yeah, that's low.
It doesn't necessarily solve anything.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So the idea of the song this week is that when you keep on living in these old areas or bringing up the past and stuff, it doesn't move you forward. It doesn't solve your problem.
True.
So this track is dedicated to Mercy Brown. Thank you for the story, Jeff. And it's called Digging Up the Dead.
Rusty nails and rotten wood and earth in every seam. I spit the dirt out of my mouth. I wake up from a dream to be thirsty like I've never been. A constant agony with the black dog that walks at my back and damns my memory. Lord, grant us mercy from afar. Forgive the prayers we should have said. Oh, you can burn up my heart and eat the ashes that I live, but you're just digging up the dead. You're just digging up the dead. The things that should be left alone, they're not for man to touch. The past is just a shallow grave that's best left in the dust. We keep kicking the pale host till the blood just turns to rust. No, you can't beat the devil by remembering too much. Lord, grant us mercy from afar. Forgive the prayers we should have said. Oh, you can burn up my heart and eat the ashes that I live, but you're just digging up the dead. 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 Oh, you're just digging up the dead. Oh, you're just digging up the dead. Oh, you're just digging up the dead.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
All right. Did we tell you about our Patreon? About a chance to celebrate the new songs, videos, podcasts, blog posts, newsletters, all the things we come out with every week.
And we've got some more stuff coming soon that's going to be very special.
Right, it's gonna blow your frickin' minds, man. So, anyway, our Patreon community, all the people that donate a couple bucks a month or more to See You on the Other Side and Sunspot, and what they get is special access, special hangouts. We're trying to figure out our next hangout right now.
That's right.
And we want to know what date is good for you, because usually we do it the last Thursday of the month.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work for everybody.
Yep.
So we're going to send out a poll to our Patreons to see when is the best time to hang out for you.
Right. And if you'd like to join the Patreon community, you can do that by visiting othersidepodcast.com/donate.
It's a very,
join the fun.
It's a very hot website. You're going to love it. And we would be remiss if we did not thank Dr. Ned.
Ned, thanks for coming to Summerfest, Ned.
Yep, it was great to see you at
Always
Summerfest,
great seeing Ned.
And Dr. Ned is at the level of Patreon where he gets a shout out every week. You can be at that level too.
Yes.
Just check out othersidepodcast.com/donate. But the real thing is we're building a community of like-minded people who are really into this stuff and want to have a reverent, funny, yet sometimes serious discussions about cool paranormal activity, pop culture, and all the things around.
And I got to say that I'm really thankful to have met some of these new friends because I'm starting to get to know people, and it's fun. I love it.
So the community part of it is the part we like the best, is because we like to, in a lot of times when you're in this, we've talked about this in the podcast before, you talk to somebody and you're like, oh, I think they're cool. And then they end up being crazy.
Oh.
And so the idea is that we're developing a community of people who can have conversations with each other and be reasonable.
Yeah.
And we can question each other sometimes. We can challenge each other sometimes. But in the end, we all respect the opinions and we all go in a direction where we find a little bit more truth in our lives.
Indeed.
So check that out, othersidepodcast.com/donate. Thanks, Ned, and to all our Patreons.
Thank you.
And you kids out there, we'll see you on the other side. And I love Paris.
All right.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. Hey.
All right. Good job, everybody. That was a lot of fun.